Míl mágad a cean córa agus fáiltíim raibh deis. Písa canse dhéanamh son na reachtaíochta seo nó an bhile seo, agus just í dús spára ba bhhatlam a chur in úl dit sé cean córa nach bhfuil le an ghilge ar fáil. Tá sé har a bheith deachar a phlé trí ghilge gan an bile a bheith trí ghilge chuir mé ceist efik an ara agus níl tíar fáil fós agus níl is ágan cén fá is banan sé sin le ceist níos cin ar alta ó híh bileide. Ach tá sé tiltte ag daoine le ghilge ó gcuachas agus ghilge mar teanga cumarsáide go méid le an ghilge den bhile acu. Comat le sin, etníam go bhfuil dul chun cin déanta agus don céadú riamh go bhfuil sé leige síos in san bile seo go mbeidh ceart uaibreach ag gach duine a bhhaineann an píosa reachtaíoch seo leis le haidh eolas bunúsach. Ach tá sé docreide go bhfuil gá le píosa reachtaíocht chun cearta a thuirt do duine atá uachtaithe fáil ar sunraí persanta agus ní léon gá le reachtaíocht maidir lumsa. So, Minister, I welcome the fact, first of all, I deplore the fact that there's no Irish version available. We've gone beyond excuses. I don't blame you personally, Minister, but this is a continuous, everyday occurrence in relation to bills. We don't have any Irish version. It's extraordinary. In Europe, bills are handed out, whatever piece of legislation, automatically in the Irish language, and we can't do that in the national parliament. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I welcome the piece of legislation, and I acknowledge the work that you have done to bring it this far. And you kept your word, and you said you would bring this bill before the Dáil, and I want to acknowledge that, and I appreciate that. Your word is groundbreaking legislation. Yes, it is, really, and I'm going to go around in circles and come back again to the legislation in relation to why it's groundbreaking. Am I satisfied with the legislation? No. I'm not, because we haven't quite got there. We haven't quite broken the chains of the patriarchy that tell us that they know best, and they know best how to protect a mother, and they know best how to protect somebody who gave up for one reason or another, was forced to give up their child for adoption, that we need to protect them in some way, as opposed to giving them maximum information and letting them make up their own mind, and equally the child that was adopted that has grown up. So we're still holding on to the chains, a little bit weakened, but still there, of patriarchy telling us what's best for us. And to understand, I welcome the progress made in the bill, actually, in relation to this schedule. I'm not sure why a schedule was necessary, because I would have thought every entity that had children in there with their mothers or without their mothers, in whatever circumstances, would come within the ambit of the bill. But I do welcome that you've extended, you will have the provision to extend the schedule of the organisations affected. I do welcome that. I welcome the change in language as well, that would drop the idiotic, terrible distinction between birth mothers and adoptive mothers. I welcome that. I welcome other matters in the bill as well. It's a very extensive bill. It has 59 pages, 10 parts, which you're very familiar with, and 66 sections. So I'd be telling an untruth if I said I have gone into it in detail. I've done my best. I wasn't on the committee. I'll come back to the committee in a minute, but I've done my best to understand and to be fair in relation to the progress being made, but still that we're operating within a framework where they know best, as opposed to parity of respect and equality. We haven't got there yet. And so in relation to the bill arises from so many things, Minister, and you inherited this. You inherited all of this. But that's why you became a minister, and within that you're operating. So where did this bill come from? Well, we'll take the latest, the Commission of Inquiry. And the Commission of Inquiry, and I have been critical of the Commission of Inquiry, quite critical, I hope constructively. I recognised at every time I spoke of the enormous work that was done within the various chapters of that Commission of Inquiry report. But the actual executive summary, which is the main part that everybody reads, is written in a very sloppy manner. And I've said this, and I won't waste my time today again on it, but it's there. It's still, the work on the various sections are very good and are useful for the future. Now, they recognised that It was one of the clearest things they said in their recommendations. Now, the recommendations are all mixed up, which doesn't make for easy reading either. They have recommendations, conclusions and opinions all put in together, which doesn't make for very easy reading. So, but they do set out clearly that it's a fundamental right. A person's right to his or her identity is an important human right and should only be denied in very exceptional circumstances. The Commission considers that there should be a right, even though it is acutely conscious of the concerns of some birth mothers about this, and so on. So it's one of their clearest recommendations, and they clearly recognise that there is a right. Where did this report come from, the Commission of Investigation? I think it's worth using my time to go back always, because, you know, our memories are becoming dimmed and we're so under media pressure to react all of the time as opposed to read and consider. And it really is important to consider where this came from. And the Commission acknowledges that the work of Catherine Corless was a catalyst. That much respect is shown. During the Christmas, I had the privilege of reading a number of books while I was isolating for lots of reasons. And one of them was Catherine Corless's book. And I read that, and I recommend it for everyone to read it. And amongst many issues, what jumped out is what Catherine Corless went through, even up to very recently, when she was in the County Council buildings doing research in relation to finding the actual records or noting the absence of records in relation to the burials of babies, 796 names. And she was actually supervised in the County Council's office, and the door was locked and an official sat with her, and she outlines this in her book amongst any other issues. And as you know, she's not given to any sort of exaggeration. Indeed, I would call her the personification of an understatement in the way she has proceeded. And it really is worth reading her book in relation to an ordinary woman doing extraordinary things in a manner that's an example to us all. And so she was the catalyst for this. And what was her work? On a shoestring budget for a magazine for the local, I think, historical, I probably have the name wrong, Heritage Society or Historical Society. She wrote an article for that after doing a lot of research, and then continued and discovered that there were 796, well, the best way to put it is missing babies and missing records, and bodies of infants and babies found in what appears to be sewage containers or containers for sewage, and we know all of that. So that eventually led to this. And then if we put this in perspective, which I'll come back to, we had 8 interim reports along with this report, some of which were published, some of which weren't published. The last one was published along with this report, or you probably did your best there to get it published. But what was never explained was why there was a delay. So I'm talking about trust here, and when we come back to the bill, again, there's a huge issue in relation to trust, because we're not trusting people who come forward to seek information. We're setting up an information session, and we're actually dissembling here. We're being a bit, I wouldn't say a bit, we're being disingenuous. We're saying it's not mandatory, but it's a requirement. So we'll come back to that in a minute, because trust is huge in all of this process, as you well know. And so when we look at this report, and there were many times that one could easily have lost trust in the process, particularly when the end result was published. There was lots of extensions of times and so on. And then this report was with the government since October 2020. Remember that now? October 2020, not published. It was finally published in January. And the final interim report, or the second last interim report, was finally published as well, with no explanation as to why it wasn't published before, no explanation as to why the report sat in the department until January, no end result in relation to the leaking of the report. Remember, we were promised that. Again, I don't wish to personalise this. I'm putting this all in the context, and I'm only picking a handful. I could speak for 2 hours on the many issues that have arisen. But when the government announces a leak, an investigation into a leak, and then nothing happens, then we question why there's such a distance between the people on the ground and politicians. And we increase that distance at our peril, because democracy is all we have. And whether I agree with you or you agree with me, the important thing is that I can have trust. and disagree with you and know what we're disagreeing with. That's vital for people who are watching and looking at democracy. I deplore what has gone on in social media in relation to politicians and insulting them and abusing them. I've no time for that. But if we make language meaningless, as has been done repeatedly, and an investigation into the leak, and then the leak, there's no conclusion. And when the Taoiseach of the country participates in the interview consequent on that leak, the interview in this Independent on the Sunday, when he's part of that, and we have to have trust, very difficult. And then we had the whole debacle over the tape recordings and so on and so on. I'm sort of watching my time carefully to come back to the substance. So all of that's happened. Then we find, we set up, we learn, well, although the department, in my opinion, knew for a very long time about illegal adoptions and illegal birth certificates. I mentioned Mike Malott, whose book was published in 1997. I mentioned the journalist O'Faherty with the Examiner, and so on, and many other people who strove to bring this information out into the open. Many times I've referred to these memorandum, which were absolutely, if I had more time I'd come back to them, but they're there. The department was fully aware. This was in the context of the McAleese report and so on. They were fully aware. So then we come forward, and the St. Patrick's Guild and TUSLA suddenly discover there are a number of irregularities, and we set up another report. I'll rephrase that because I see you cringing a little bit. TUSLA make us aware that there are a number of irregularities in over 100 records. And so another report is set up, this time by a woman from Northern Ireland. I specifically don't mention her name because I understand that when the report was published, she was unhappy with some issues and that she asked for her name to be removed from the report. If I'm wrong, correct me, and I'll be the first to put my hand up and apologise. I understand her name remained on the report, even though she didn't want it on the report. That report was never discussed in the Dáil. This is in relation to illegal records. Now, if it was never discussed in the Dáil, how can we sort of be fully informed about legislation? And so a shadow cast long, the 9th of March 2021, the government was in possession of that, I understand, for approximately 2 years. It took almost 2 years to publish it. A sample of 1,496 records out of a total of 74,350, a 2% sample. And of course, what she did was supervised or monitored the two agencies involved, TUSLA and the Adoption Authority. And the 2% sample between 4,900 and 18,000, I won't go down into the minutiae, but what she said was the existence of markers, so there were different markers that alerted TUSLA and anybody reading the file, something irregular here needs further investigation. She said it raises concerns that between 4,900 and 18,900 records could potentially be related to incorrect or irregular birth registrations. Now, what did we do with that report? Did we discuss it? Did we get an explanation as to why that lady wanted her name removed? Are we ever going to discuss it? What is the point in having reports if we don't? During the time of now it's gone to, I understand, is it the Special Rapporteur for Children? Again, that report was promised, wasn't it? It was promised due on the 31st of October 2021. Report with the Minister, and it's yet to be published. We've repeatedly asked for this, just like with violence against women and all the reports. Language has begun to mean nothing. Will be published shortly, will be published in the next few weeks, and it doesn't happen. And we're all reduced to giving out as opposed to implementing the policies. So what did we learn from the woman who wants to remain nameless and produced a very moderate report? How did that feed into policy? How do we know it fed into policy if we've never seen it? In relation to the ongoing reports while the Mother and Baby Commission was going on, we had a report by a special group of specialists who carried out a report into the Tuam site. We've had no action on that. They've come forward publicly, which is most unusual, I understand, the professional archaeologists to say, we went in for a short period of time. We did not leave the place. We left it in a temporary protective condition. that we thought would be weeks or months, it's now years, nothing has happened. Can you imagine that? What that does, creating a vacuum of no trust. You quite correctly set out the background in your speech, and I welcome your detailed speech. From the 1952 Adoption Act forward, it became operational in 53. It was passed through the Dáil in 52, and it was clearly a closed-loop system designed to tell us what was best in terms of what was best for a child. Indeed, the regulatory impact analysis carried out for this bill tells us, interestingly, in a nutshell, there is currently no legislation governing the release of birth information to adopted persons and others who are seeking to know their origins, and they go on. The Adoption Act, which came into effect on the 1st of January 53, placed adoption on a statutory footing in Ireland, and all adoptions have been required to comply and so on. The Adoption Act 52 contained no provisions regarding access to information or tracing, and this is what I find significant. The authors of this regulatory impact analysis tell us at the time society believed that closed adoption was preferable, whereby a child was legally transferred to another set of parents and the bond with the original parents was severed. Now let me tell you that the society I belong to never ever accepted that breaking a bond between a child and a mother was acceptable. So when we get a regulatory impact analysis that perpetuates this narrative that was in the mother and baby home, that was society's view, I take exception to that. It wasn't the society that I belonged to. We were fully aware of the importance. I lost a mother myself, which is immaterial. I never wish to bring in personal matters. But every family has something. And the importance of bonding cannot be underestimated. And here we have in the 21st century telling us that was society. It was not society. It was the powerful against the powerless, which continues, unfortunately, in this bill, in the sense that we now have unconditional access to information. However, in an Irish fashion, with an Irish solution to an Irish problem, we put in the little hurdle of, well, you don't have to meet a social worker anymore, meet a designated person. I don't know who that person will be, he, she, what qualifications. They're going to ring you, either meet you if you want or have a virtual. So it goes something like this. Hello, how are you, Catherine? I have information here for you. And Catherine is on the other side of the phones of God, looking up to heaven and ignoring everything. And so that's what I would be doing if I was being subjected to that hurdle. And so the question is, what is the purpose of it? Is there somebody going to assess the quality of that interaction? Is that what you're going to do? Because literally, that's what I would do. I would say, oh, I'd go through the motions. Perhaps I wouldn't on another day. Perhaps I'd say, no way am I going through the motions. But just say I do. And I don't interact in any way, but I just hear you. Doesn't that bring home the idiocy of what you're doing with this little extra hurdle and add to the insult of an Irish solution again? Now just think of that, and I don't wish to be dramatic, but one has to put it in a picture, you know, a designated person telling me on a phone, and I have the phone out here, or I have my eyes up to heaven on a virtual thing, and I go through this, and you have now complied with your obligation, supposedly under the Constitution, which I find very difficult to understand, and with to treat the mother with delicacy because that mother has registered her non-preference. And that's the way of treating her, by talking to me as the adopted person. I'm telling you what you're saying, but I don't have to do anything about it. I mean, it's positively, mind-bogglingly not understandable, Minister. So I put it as absurd as I can to try and bring home what's happening here in relation to, while at the same time recognises the tremendous work that has gone into this. Let's go back to the committee with 83 recommendations. I've read them. I've read the 83 recommendations. I've gone through it. I've looked at what they said in relation to alternative ways of communicating this information, from registered letters to other ways of doing it. They've been utterly ignored. There are many other recommendations in the 83. Some you've taken on board, some you've taken on board. Others, which are very practical, haven't been looked at all. And that was after an intensive engagement with all of the witnesses that came before the committee. I pay tribute to the chair and the members. But that's the way to deal with legislation, isn't it? At committee level, tease out all of these issues and then come back before us and then with further amendments. Now we're going to be in the position of having amendments, and the irony is I'll be in that chair more than likely bringing down a guillotine on the debate. And that's not a way to deal with this, certainly not after our history, certainly not as a woman and a female TD and a mother. This is no way. Information as of right must mean what it says.